Talk what you started about talking how you got interested in implicit bias and prejudice research, and I would like to ask all three of you when you became first aware of bias, and then maybe talk a little bit about your own experiences, and also introducing Tally and Kat a little more. But maybe you continue with your start, and then we follow up.
Well, so I grew up in a household that was very mindful of all of this. My mother was a Holocaust survivor, and so that was a constant theme, was, that there could be this kind of deadly discrimination. And my father was kind of a civil rights leader, so I thought I was going to be a civil rights lawyer. And then I was in a pre-law class in college, and the professor said, who's going to be a lawyer? And we all raised our hand, and he said, don't. Mid-1980s, and he said, there are too many lawyers, and that kind of, got me thinking. But then in the meantime, I started doing some psych research, and I got excited about that. And so I really did go to grad school to study prejudice and discrimination, and I was very excited by all of the social psychological paradigms that could be applied to that. And then just had the good fortune to be able to study with Nachi, who was, this is I got there in '93, and that's as they were inventing the implicit association test. And so we would sit around her lab table talking about how to score the data and what it means and other things that you could do with it. And so it was pretty inspiring.
Great. To your right is Professor Patricia Ordonez. She's an associate professor in the Department of Computer Science at the University of Puerto Rico in Rio, Piedras. And she studied your BA and PhD and MS in the United States, and is the first Latina to graduate with a PhD from the College of Engineering and Information Technology from University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and the first promoted to associate professor in the department at University of Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras. Drawing on this journey of your academic beginning, was that, did you...
Let me just say, for one, this is the first time that's ever been announced.
Congratulations!
Yay!
No. Did you how to say? No, I lost.
Sorry, no. So have I experienced?
Yeah.
When was the first time?
When did you first time experience it? Was it something that you became aware of during your education, or was it something on your mind before?
Like, I was just like, what is this judgment about? Like, I think I'm doing such a great job. Why do they keep saying I'm not doing a great job? And suddenly then in 2009, I went to a conference. And especially because it was computer science. So my history, I went to Hopkins and I went in to electrical engineering with the idea of studying computer science, but it was actually beginning back then. I wanted to do programming, and I took mini computers, and I was so intimidated that after that class I got a C. It was not so bad for a guy, but for women, I think this is also bad. It was my first C. I'd never gotten a C. And so I was like, okay, I'm never going to excel at this. I was so intimidated. And I had this really long journey saying how I got into the PhD program in computer science. And it's like 15 years long getting there. But when I went back to the PhD program, by that time I knew how to program in Java, C, C++, I could do web design. I had all the programming skills, and I still felt like, why do I feel like I'm not, why do I feel I still have to prove myself, right? And then in 2009, I went to Tapia Conference, which is the Tapia celebration of diversity in computing. And I saw Jane Margolis speak. And she basically wrote a book called Stuck in the Shallow End. It basically talks about the disparities between Latinos and computer science education and African Americans in California, which is like, so it was Latino, then it was here in UCLA. So it was she described all the things that I was feeling. And that's the first time I had heard about the term preparatory privilege, unconscious bias. She didn't say implicit bias, but she mentions unconscious bias, which is the same thing. but so that was the moment.
And how about you, Kat Adams, on the other side? She's a graduate student here at UC Berkeley in the plant and molecular lab, Moon's lab. And from what I read, is that beyond your grad studies, you also have the co-founder of the student organization. Here it is, the Unconscious Bias Project here at UC Berkeley. And reading a little bit about you, I heard that you became fascinated with this topic before you came to Berkeley, and maybe you want to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, so my story is pretty different from the other two here, but I had actually started my PhD at Harvard University in Boston, and it was going really great. I loved my lab, it was perfect, really interdisciplinary, super queer, awesome, and my advisor didn't get tenure for what seemed like no good reason at all. And being the precocious person that I am, I started asking a lot of questions as to why she didn't get tenure and who's been getting tenure. And what I learned is that there wasn't a single female professor that had kids that got tenure in the 7 years that she'd been there. But plenty of dads got tenure, and women that didn't have children got tenure. And so I came across literature about the motherhood bias, which is well documented both within STEM and within other fields. And I was like, well, this is a problem. We need to be doing something about this. And from there, when I first got here, I mastered out of Harvard. I started my PhD over again here, and I started asking around, like, who wants to fix this? Like, there is data on what we can do to address this. We need to make people more aware of the fact that this is even a problem. And so I got to use some of my science communication and science journalism skills and apply it to what originally started as a website and a registered student organization, and has since sort of snowballed into a nonprofit. We've given talks to the Microsoft International Association for Channel Partners. We've given talks to actually senators in Sacramento, other tech companies nearby, and a bunch of talks on campus. And so we raise awareness about what this is, how it affects, mostly we focus, at least for now, on the field of STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and math, sort of leveraging our in-group bias as mostly scientists and technology people ourselves, talking to other people within STEM, but really focusing on the literature about this and what the data say and what evidence-based approaches that we can take to actually fix this. And so I think to complement what Professor Glaser said earlier, there is some really interesting research on these sort of like prerequisites to bias reduction, and I think that's where some of those papers in that list that he showed fall out. And these sorts of things are things like you have to be really motivated to reduce your bias, and not all of the studies like really tell people, like really define the problem in a way that really motivates people to want to do the mental gymnastics that you have to get over this. You have to be aware of the influence of stereotypes and just how prolific they are. You have to really become aware of how you can be biased, even if you are consciously against discrimination of all sorts. And then you have to learn and practice these different strategies, which he did mention some of, which are things like thinking of a counter-stereotypic example or stereotype replacement. So if you're, the classic example I give is like you're walking down Oakland and a black man's walking towards you, and your immediate stereotypic thought is that he might try to rob you, and you replace that stereotype of unsafe with something like safe. Or you can think of a counter-stereotypic example, and there's a whole paper on the Obama effect, where you can just think of how great a President Obama was, and that will actually help you to have less biased thinking. And so, like, you know, this is a really big problem, and not, you know, not just policing, not just STEM, but medicine is hugely important, all these different fields. But there are things that we can do about it, and there's, you know, policy changes that are really important, anonymizing everything that we can like that, learning to reduce our own biases, and then also speaking up when other people, you know, reinforce stereotypes or say things that are biased. We actually have a really great cartoonist that draws different ways that bias can manifest, and then in our workshops we give examples for what you could say in response and how to be a bias buddy to speak up. And I brought my bias bucket, so if you want to share any examples of things that you've experienced, you can make it into a cartoon that will help teach others how to be a little bit more great to each other.
Drawing on experiences, I know that you prepared some of your experiences, and maybe you want to bring them in now, or you want to just do them in the discussion?
So, am I the only one?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, then maybe
You don't need to
so.
search.
But I want to.
Prepare some slides that not necessarily to show, but we can. I just wanted to give you the opportunity to do that, and then just jump over it. But we can just have it here as a discussion, and then maybe if you bring in your experiences and you can also share some, that could be also a good moment for you to think about your own experiences and then come up and join us and share them in, and we can start opening this into a more interactive panel discussion.
It's really nice up here.
Is
I
it?
recommend experiencing it.
Oh, so I start. So when I first went, so I guess I should, you guys have heard When Women Code, or Why Women Stop Coding, so most of you have heard that. And so I was featured in that, and I was surprised as hell when I was featured because they interviewed like hundreds of women at the Grace Hopper. But I guess like, so my experience in undergrad was 1985, and that kind of goes with the year with the slope. And it's like if you look at in computer science, it's the only science that has this incredible decline in terms of women. And so anyway, so when I started that, I basically just took this circuitous route, and I ended up after 5 years of teaching high school, I ended up wanting to still have that desire to go to tech. And so I got a job at a software company because they wanted someone who was bilingual and they would teach me tech. And they promised me an education, which I never got. I got one Windows class. It's typical of tech companies that they make these kinds of promises and then you're in there. And the way they taught me tech was I'd answer the phone and get the client's problem, and then I'd have to like put it on mute. Okay, what do I do now? I mean, it was terrible. There wasn't a formal training program, and I was a teacher, so it was like this was really disturbing. But on my downtime, I would look at the program, and I could manipulate the checks. And so I like manipulated one check and made me one for $15,000. But in any case, when I showed it to my boss, then he wanted me to manipulate checks for other people. So that's how I still don't know what in the world programming language it was, but I was interested in programming at that point. And I told my boss, I really want to program. And he basically looked at me and said, but I don't think you have the aptitude for it. And I was like, I'm the only one in the group who can do this manipulation. Like, it was evident to me at that point, now something's going on that is really bizarre. And so I decided that day I was going to quit. I decided to take a trip through South America, and I was going to figure out what I was going to do because I was not going to be in this industry. And I go through South America, and everywhere I went, this is in 2000, I found an internet cafe. And it told me how internet can go everywhere when these people can't. I realized two things there. I'm very privileged just by being white, because white people can travel like nobody else. You get so much privilege by the color of your skin, and you don't even realize it. The second thing I realized is that they would be able to travel through computers, and so I was like, I'm going to do something in computers at some point, and I'm going to learn how to program. So I came back, and I was hired by a technical training company in which the boss said, I think you have aptitude. And I was like, yes! And he said that over his wife, who was in the class with me, and his favorite. And I was like, oh my God, maybe I could do this. And they did pay for my education, so I got very excited, and I stayed with them for 5 years. But I realized at some point, they hired this 20-year-old who made these books really fast, but they were horrible. But they kept telling how great his work was, but they didn't give me credit for being able to edit it. They didn't give me credit for testing all his code, which was wrong, and fixing it, right? So he would do all that stuff, get all the credit, and be called a genius, and I wasn't. Well, we both ended up going to grad school together. He ended up with an MS, I ended up with a PhD. So there are just these biases.
Nothing wrong with an MS.
But I had something to prove. I think the motivation, he could take an MS and get a lot of money. I realized I needed the PhD to actually get validity, because people were not going to think I'm smart until I got the PhD. Now, I'm going to skip to right now. I have actually this summer, right now, taken a sabbatical. I'm not going to get into the whole getting tenure. That's a horrible process, dehumanizing. I don't like it. I think it's awful. But once you get it, then you have a lot more freedom. But now, on the sabbatical, I've actually gone to 2 places to talk about diversity. I'm thinking, finally, somebody's going to care about what I've done and talk about. They wanted to know education, I realized that they only want to hear what they think they should hear, and there's all this unconscious bias that's happening. And so I like being invited to this panel was like, I was like, oh my God, what is up with this? Because finally I get to talk about it. So yeah. So right now I'm in the sad part is I'm working with a company that is helping underrepresented women, led by an all-white women team who doesn't realize how they're putting down the underrepresented women, or they don't even realize how what I've been doing to bring them up, so that they have, like all their other classes that they've had so far, all the women have dropped out. And thus far, I've attracted all these women, and they actually said to me, but you're being paid as much as me, and you're not doing enough, you're not producing. We're a startup, you need to do more. And at that point, I was like, I'm only making, and I'm gonna tell you the number so you guys can all guess, $63,000. I'm being paid the Puerto Rico salary. I went to that big company to make enough money so that I could survive in California on that salary with my obligations. And they said this to me. So I'm going back Thursday. But it's sad because it's an unconscious thing. It's really not, and it keeps this structural imbalance such that only the privileged can come out of it. And it's heart-wrenching because you don't know how to change that. There.
I need a workshop. I'll give you my card.
We'll talk. Because I really don't know what to do by Thursday. I need the workshop before Thursday.
Just downloadable on our website, unconsciousbiasproject.org.
You know, that reminded me of, you asked what our personal experiences
Yeah.
were, and I gave you sort of a general one of mine and my family's history. But your comment about how white people can travel was one of my earliest personal reckonings of racism, which was that, I mean, my dad was a civil rights leader, we would talk about it around the table, and in concept, in theory, prejudice was this terrible thing that I heard the stories, but I didn't experience it. And then coincidentally, I was in Puerto Rico with my track team in college, and we were leaving the beach, and we needed a pit stop, and somebody said, let's go in that hotel. And one of the black guys on the team said, I can't just saunter into a hotel. I can't just walk in and use the bathroom in a hotel. Why do you think? And for us, it was just something we took for granted. Of course, you go anywhere you want. You just walk in and say, I'm going to use your bathroom. So that was one of the more concrete experiences that I had that really made it sink in.
How about you?